Hello everyone, Ains here, welcome back to Season Gaming. So today we're going to be talking about this, the DualSense controller for the PlayStation 5. Now, if you follow the channel, you know we're pretty passionate about controllers. We've done repair videos, reviews, aftermarket controllers, customizations, all of those things. And we've done so for a wide range of controllers from the Switch to the PlayStation to Xboxes. Partly that's because not only are we passionate about gaming, obviously, but we come from ex-competitive realms where we used to play competitively on various games, and so we get pretty picky about our controllers. Now, I've talked extensively before about my qualms with the PlayStation 4 controller, the DualShock 4, and how it was kind of not a very good competitive controller, and I've used and reviewed many third-party options from the Nikon to the Astro to the Scuff, etc. But with the advent and release of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X to a lesser degree, we have new controllers. And so what I wanted to do today is just talk about the details of this controller and how it stacks up. As you can see, kind of got a wealth of controllers behind me, and let you know clear thoughts. So before we get to the DualSense directly, we need to talk about the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 controllers. Let's start with the Xbox One. Now, if you, again, you know us well enough if you follow the channel to know that we're not taking sides in the whole PlayStation Xbox debate. So if that's what you're here for, you might as well leave now because it's going to be a waste of your time. Objectively, the Xbox One controller, whether you like the offset sticks or not, I'm not going to really get into that, was kind of the standard. It's most used for PC gaming for people who use controllers, and there were a lot of kind of third-party peripherals that you could use to use this controller on your PlayStation 4. Now, some of the great things about this controller: one, ergonomically, for most people, it's a very, very nice controller. Thumbsticks are nice. They're both concave with nice kind of rigid outsides. Really responsive triggers, and ergonomically, again, designed to where your finger kind of wraps around the trigger and sits nicely in there. So for shooters, perfect. Just a very good controller. Now, contrast that to the DualShock 4. Got the beautiful God of War edition here. This, while an improvement from the DualShock 3, and it added some features, obviously, such as the light bar, the speaker, etc., there's still just a lot of dated things on this controller. One, the thumbsticks drive me crazy and always have. They're very shallow, which I've pointed out before. They're not actually concave. While they have a ridge around them, they're still domed here, and so your thumb doesn't really sit there very well. This material is very kind of slippery. It doesn't really hold a good grip. The D-pad is it's very good directionally. So if you're like an inventory or something like that, it's very good up, down, left, right. But if you play things like fighters or a lot of 2D shooters, shmups, those types of things, it's just far less than ideal. Two other things actually. The triggers, again, very shallow, hardly any curve to them. So they just feel really flimsy, and your finger doesn't set on there cleanly. And then lastly, the shape. The shape has always been rather small if you have, normal sized or big hands, which again, when you do this with it, brings your thumbs across, right on top of each other. And it's just less than ideal, And so when I saw that they were updating the controller for the PlayStation 5 with the DualSense, I got very excited because I really wanted to see what they put into it. So that's kind of the basis of where we are. And if you notice, like I said, you follow the channel, there's been a lot of third-party options for the PlayStation 4 over the past several years, which have vastly improved your options. So we've used Nikon, the Astro, the Scuff. Like I said, I prefer the Nikon currently, but that's last gen. So let's move on to it. First, we'll start with the Xbox Series X controller. Now, when Xbox showed this off, everyone was like, what did you change? It looks like the same controller. And fundamentally, it is very, very similar to the Xbox One controller. However, if you haven't held one of these or you haven't used one of these, it is more different than you would expect. First, it's slightly smaller, just slightly. And so ergonomically, it really, at least for me, and I know that's kind of subjective depending on your size, your hands obviously, but it just fits extremely well in your hands. It feels like it's an extension of your hands. They've improved the D-pad. So the D-pad on the Xbox One controllers were kind of a four-way, similar to PlayStation 4 or DualShock 4, except it was connected. Whereas on this, they've gone to more of what they experimented with on the Elite controller, like here, which is kind of a modular D-pad. You know, it's a flat thing, but it allows you the 8-way kind of movement, and it's fantastic. It's a little loud, it's a little clicky, but it's fantastic. In fact, if you pay attention to Season Gaming, you know, I did a stream where I played through Cuphead beginning to end last week in one stream using this controller and this D-pad. It's just fantastic for things like that. The thumbsticks are a little smaller than the old one, but they're great material, fully concave. Your thumb sits right in there, great movement and grip. And these triggers, as always, they're kind of ergonomically designed as part of the controller, so your finger just wraps right around, slots in there, and just a great, you know, just a great kind of fit, if you will. So it's just solid. There's no kind of major complaints with this controller. Everything works as it's intended to. It feels really nice to hold and use. So that's what the DualSense is up against coming into the generation. And thankfully, it's a vast improvement over the DualShock 4. If you're one of those people that sadly hasn't been able to get a PlayStation 5 because they've been sold out, you know, everywhere, and you haven't held one of these yet, but you're a big PlayStation player or fan, and you've just over years gotten used to their standard controllers for whatever reason and use the DualShock 4 still today, I think you're going to be very, very pleasantly surprised by the DualSense. So let's talk through a lot of the big changes. The first one you'll notice right away, it's a much bigger controller. So for those, like I said, where the DualShock has always been very small and your thumbs kind of come together in the middle, it's a far wider controller. In fact, what I find funny is if you follow Xbox and PlayStation history, it was Xbox who always had the big fat controller, especially the original, versus the PlayStation controller, which was much more compact, and that was always thought to be due to the American market versus the Japanese market. Well, now we've come full circle because the DualShock controller is actually wider than the Series X controller. I don't know if you can see that, but it's definitely broader across than the Series X controller. And so when you hold it, it just, you know, for me especially, it's much more ergonomically pleasing than the DualShock. Your hands just kind of fit into these handles. They're also longer, which you can pretty much tell from the pictures, right? And so just holding this controller is a night and day difference over the DualShock 4. So big improvement there. The other thing, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the looks, either way you like the way it looks or doesn't. That's neither here nor there. But I think the thing that's gotten the most press, of course, with the DualSense are the haptics. And so, you know, what's in the triggers and the rumble and how it makes you feel things. And in particular, the showcase for those features is Astro's Playroom, which comes with every PlayStation 5. And I will tell you that if you haven't played that yet or haven't gotten your hands on this yet, it is incredible. The haptics are truly, truly impressive, and that's coming from someone who didn't dismiss them coming in prior to launch, but I had my reservations around if they were going to be really kind of game-changing. I don't know how third parties and other companies are going to utilize these features in the future, but the potential is there because it is really, really, really impressive. And so that's a fantastic bonus for this, something that you don't get on the Xbox side. The other interesting thing to note about that is that it's likely, from the things I've heard, that the haptics and all of the design and kind of methodology that went into designing this is going to be used in PSVR 2. Now we know that PSVR 2 is coming at some point for the PlayStation 5, very likely to have its own kind of control units, more similar to the modern VR units versus, say, the Move controllers, which the original PSVR used, but are very dated today. And so I think it's really cool that Sony invested in this haptic technology because, you know, it's just kind of moving the bar forward a little bit, right? Which you love to see. The other thing I find interesting is these buttons. So I think these buttons are a little smaller. I've tried comparing them. Obviously, being as small they are, they're kind of hard to measure. But I believe them to be a little smaller than the DualShock 4, which you can kind of see, you know, if you hold them side by side. And they're completely flat, almost. So when you push them, they're just, you know, they're very small and kind of touchy. No problem there. It's just something I noticed. However, now let me get to the things that I don't quite understand with the DualShock, or DualSense, excuse me, is Sony went through all the trouble of redesigning this controller fully, probably tons of ergonomic, tests and whatnot. The haptics, obviously, a lot went into that. But they've left a couple other aspects of the controller nearly alone, and I don't know why. It's got so much potential to be this amazing controller, and it just comes up short, especially I would say for competitive gamers, because of a few features, which I'll point out. So, as I mentioned on the DualShock 4, thumbsticks are the biggest thing. When you're playing 3D shooters, competitive shooters, thumbsticks are hugely important. That's why expensive controllers such as the Elite allow you to customize different heights, different lengths, different concave, dome, etc., and really kind of adjust it to your will. Same with any of the aftermarket controllers. As I said on the DualShock 4, very shallow, small range of movement, bad material, bad kind of thumb setting in there. And yes, you can force yourself to get used to it. And for a lot of people, I realize it's not a big deal. But to those people who really get into this, it is. And so what I found most depressing about the DualSense is, overwhelmingly, these thumbsticks are the same as the DualShock 4. They are a slightly stickier material, which is nice. I'm glad they did that. And the ridge around the outside here is kind of perforated, more similar to what you find on the Xbox controllers. But the design otherwise is almost identical. The movement's the same, very shallow. They have this ridge, but they're domed in the middle, so your thumb just kind of slides right off as you try to make fast movements, Just not a fan of them, and I don't know why they spent all that time and money redesigning such a cool controller while leaving these crappy thumbsticks alone. It's weird to me. They've redesigned the bumpers, which is nice. These are better. They're wider. So if you can look at those side by side, the bumpers, see? They're wider, and they give you a better range of motion. You can actually kind of feel them depress, so that's nice. However, the triggers, like I said, shallow, not very curvature. It's very similar, as you can see, side by side. I'm trying to give you the best angle. Side by side there, they're very, very similar, again, to the DualShock 4. The only difference is these go a little deeper, and I think that's for the haptics, because if you've played some games, they kind of can push back on you. But the actual curve and the ergonomics here are the same. In fact, remember how I was saying that on the Series X controller, if you look at this, let me give you the right angle. So you see how this curves here, and it actually curves into the trigger, so that when you lay your finger here, it just wraps around naturally. It just feels like it's part of the controller. Whereas on these PlayStation controllers, there's just a hard edge right here. Look at this. I mean, it's just a stiff edge and then this big trigger up here, and it really isn't even curved enough. So it just feels, it doesn't feel kind of part of the controller, if that makes sense. So that's a shame too. I really wish, a lot of the third-party options had much better triggers than the DualShock 4 for the PlayStation 4, and I was hoping they would be a lot better on the DualSense. They're just not. And lastly, for someone who plays a lot of 2D games like myself, or like I said, fighting games or some things like that, the D-pad. I don't know why they refuse to update this D-pad. It's very similar to where it's a single plate underneath the plastic, but it's 4 directional buttons. Exact same thing here as the DualShock 4. So it may look different because it's clear, but the actual motion of this is the same. And when you're trying to do radial motions or something like that 8 ways, it's just not a good D-pad. It's just not. And it depresses me that Xbox spent a lot of time improving their D-pad and making one that's freaking fantastic. When I go over to the PlayStation 5 and try to play something where I need to use the D-pad, because it's just not good. And so, one other small feature that I do like, though, is the speaker. I forgot to mention that the DualShock 4 introduced the speaker on the controller, which was unique to PlayStation and still is. So the DualSense carries that forward, and I like it. It's just one of those nice little things. And if you're just playing with a friend or doing something, you can even use it as your mic, which is very cool. So, in terms of what I would say overall, I know a lot of people are like, well, is the DualSense finally the best controller on the market? Because I think the general consensus for years has been that the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One controller was the best overall controller. And the question, of course, is the DualSense now the best one? And it's tough, it's always opinionated. I'm not trying to get into some sort of debate. The truth of the matter is, the best controller would be if you mix these two together. If these two could have a baby and mate, you'd have the best controller on the market. Because, you know, ergonomically it's always going to be hit or miss depending on who you are, the size of your hands, etc., like I said. But the D-pad, the triggers, and the general the thumbsticks and the general overall feel of this is damn near perfect. It's too good. It's probably the best ergonomically just feeling controller I've ever used, even compared to the Elite Series 2. Whereas the DualSense is a massive improvement from this DualShock 4. It's a much more serious controller. You know, it just feels better. It's very well designed. It's solid. It's ergonomic. It feels good in your hands. I just wish they had not continued to just think that these thumbsticks and triggers were fine, as you know, as they were. They could have improved it so much more. And I really hope, given the quality of everything else with it, how it's built, the haptics, I really hope we see a Sony first-party solution that includes those features, but gets us closer to something like the Elite Series 2. Again, if you followed the channel, you know we've done a lot of stuff on the Elite controllers. This is the Series 2. Not a fair comparison to the regular controllers because it's $180. But it's just, you know, this is still my go-to overall. I just think it's the best overall controller, even with people having some, you know, breakage on small things here and there. But just overall, it's just like almost the perfect controller. But yeah, the DualSense, very happy with it. I'm glad Sony improved it. It's not a pain to use. I just hope in the future we see, you know, kind of a higher end option. For now, as much as I've complained about the thumbsticks, it's actually the first kind of standard controller I've ever used Control Freaks on. So, you know, I've been using these and kind of get the white and blue, the Sony colors, and you just snap these on the thumbsticks, and it just gives you, you know, it just gives you a much better grip. It's fully concave and a better material when you're playing shooters, something competitive. I play a lot of Demon Souls, you know, I'm using these. I think they're a little too big, in my opinion. You know, I wish they were smaller. But from a movement standpoint, they're just much better. So, anyway, I think that I've covered most of the details of these controllers. You know, if you're yet to get a PlayStation 5 and looking forward to the DualSense, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Very, very nice controller, especially for something that's kind of a standard, you know, with the system. And the haptics are bloody brilliant. So it's really neat. But, you know, here's to hoping that Sony puts as much effort into the little nuances of the controller in the future. For now, you know that we're always covering these things. We have every console controller you can imagine. So if you have any specific questions, you want any specific comparisons to other controllers, anything that we can answer for you, leave a comment. As always, truly appreciate the support at Season Gaming. And, you know, always love hearing the feedback. So thank you for your support, and we will see you next time. Until then.